Check, check. Okay. Good Sabbath once again to everybody. It is good to be here. And I don't have any announcements today. There are several things going on this week, but nothing I think that is worth noting for everybody to be aware of. But let's go ahead and begin the message. It is an important message today, something that we may or may not be very familiar with, but it's something that we should be familiar with. Understanding that in every organization, in every society, in every nation, if you will, there must be law and order. We call it government. The Greeks call it, and I'll probably get this wrong, but kirvenisi. The Spanish call it gobierno, and the Hebrews call it misra. But in every language, this term means the same thing. It is a body of people who control and administer policy. Now, this body has offices or positions of authority, such as a president or a king, and within the administration, there are lower subjects or lower offices, but they are all people that apply and enforce designated policies or laws. And in this way, the governing body is always a hierarchical administration in which the higher the office, the more authority that individual has. Now, I'm not telling you anything that you do not already know, but what we need to understand that government is an essential part of our lives. And when we consider the scope of its function, it is more important to us than family, than jobs. It's important to our neighborhoods. It's important to our daily living, whether it be brief or it be long. In order to have a peaceful and prosperous society, there needs to be government, but this doesn't mean that all forms of government serve the benefit of everyone that is in that society. There are some forms of government that we are aware of, like fascism, communism, and the like, socialism, that these are designed not for the greater good, but they are designed to serve the benefit of a privileged class. Even in most monarchies and democracies that have existed down through the ages, they have not been entirely in line with the principles and laws according to true government found in the government of God. And those laws and statutes are found in the Bible. Now, the democracy that was established in the country that you and I live in, the nation of America, is the longest lasting democracy in the history of the world. And this is the best that good and decent men could do. And yet we see now that this democracy has become a corrupt form of government. The best form of government is found in God's kingdom. The kingdom of God is a society that exists right now in heaven. It has a king, it has laws, it is a divine empire, if you will, that serves God, and in this way, the best interests of God-fearing individuals that are found in the angelic community. It is a hierarchical administration. It has a king. It has a lesser king, or perhaps some would call a prince. And then it has lower subjects within the angelic community that have lesser power and authority. However, God's kingdom, his government that exists at this time, is not something that was meant to exist in heaven alone. That it is something that God wanted men to practice on the earth. It was made known to people from Adam to Israel and beyond who were instructed to follow the commandments, the statutes, and the laws of God's government. And when these godly principles were violated, we see that tragedy came. The nation, the people, and then the nation declined to the point of a moral breakdown, and eventually they would be destroyed. But God's government is something that is not for nations alone. It is something that is to be practiced within a nation, that is within the body of the church. Something that you and I are to practice. But how do we reflect this? How do we reflect the leadership and the function of what God had established in the nation of Israel, for example? A nation that was designed to be a true nation under God on the earth. Let's turn over to Leviticus in chapter 8. Leviticus chapter 8, to read a little bit about that. It was once thought that democracy would protect people from tyranny. And that form of government that has been practiced in America has lasted for nearly 250 years now. But we see that it's not God's government, and it is not serving the greater good of the people at this time, when the people at the top abuse their power to enrich themselves. We might call them lifelong politicians, or what do they refer to it as? What's that? Career politicians, that's the term. It slipped my mind for a minute. Making a career out of it. That was not what it was designed to be. People were called, blessed, if you will, to serve in the government, and then they would serve their term and they would go back to their homes and their previous lives, but not so much anymore, because people have found it to be very lucrative. And it has led to our government allowing bribery, literal bribery, to take place, and they have legalized it. They call it lobbyism, and it has existed for decades, but it didn't start out this way. And the lobbyist, which is a middleman between politicians and corporations, that is, between lawmakers and the people that they serve, that they are on their payroll, this was a position that was once frowned upon, because it was known that, these people, they did shady backroom deals, and they were people of low or ill character. They wanted to pay politicians so that they would create policies or adjust policies or laws in favor of the corporation or their business. But now it's considered to be an honorable role in society. And there are actually many House, Senate, Congress members who go on to become lobbyists, while there are lobbyists that actually become politicians. It's kind of a corrupt revolving door that we have happening in this country, and it's very, very lucrative to them. People go into office or become a lobbyist with not much, and they come out multimillionaires, owning multiple properties, and their families have, great jobs, plush living. I read recently that for every member of Congress, there are around 23 lobbyists per member of Congress. And all of them are trying to twist their arms and offering all kinds of perks and vacations and jobs for your children, jobs for your friends, jobs for your family, and millions of dollars to your campaign, your re-election contribute, that are used in any way they see fit. Even within the Church of God, we see that there is a form of democracy in some organizations, and this is something that will not work. We are not, in fact, instructed to elect people to become elders or pastors or presidents. One group that's considered themselves to be united has since divided into at least 3 splinter groups, and they have a form of democracy. And so a religious democracy in the Church of God is not the answer. What we see is God choosing certain individuals for his purpose, and when the choice was not clear, we have examples of people drawing lots because they wanted God to choose and not them. And this assures that those who lead God's government on the earth desire to serve God first and foremost. It began with Moses and Aaron. These were individuals chosen to serve the civil and religious sides of God's government. And this is the chief function, if you will, of God's government and therefore government within the church. It is to serve God first and foremost. Now, this does not mean serving God in a way that people might want or choose, but it's in the way that God dictates. In other words, we can't make up our own rules or adjust rules according to our liking. God must be the ruler of that government, meaning that those who govern must accept God as the ruler over their own lives. This was taught to the tribes of Israel. It was also taught to the mixed multitude that came out of Egypt with the tribes. At the very beginning of God establishing them as a nation, God chose Moses, called him personally, spoke to him personally, and Moses ordained Aaron and his sons to be priests. And this was by God's instruction. And they both were to serve God on behalf of the people. Now, there would be only one high priest, and of course we understand the representation of that, of there being only one high priest in heaven, who is Christ. This is the way of God's government. The ordination of Aaron and his sons is found in Leviticus chapter 8, in verse 1, where it says that the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, "Take Aaron and his sons with him, and the garments, the anointing oil, a bull as a sin offering, 2 rams, and a basket of unleavened bread." And so we hear Moses acting as an officiating priest in this ceremony. And Aaron had 4 sons at that time. And it says, "Gather all the congregation together at the door of the tabernacle of meeting." So Moses did as the Eternal commanded him, and the congregation was gathered together at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And Moses said to the congregation, "This is what the Eternal commanded to be done." They're all going to witness this. And Moses brought Aaron and his sons and washed them with water. And he put the tunic on him, girded him with the sash, clothed him with the robe, and put the ephod on him. And he girded him with the intricately woven band of the ephod, and with it tied the ephod on him. Then he put on the breastplate. He put the Urim and Thummim in the breastplate. And he put the turban on his head. Also on the turban, on its front, he put the golden plate, the holy crown, as the Eternal had commanded Moses. And Moses took the anointing oil and anointed the tabernacle and all that was in it, and consecrated them. He sprinkled some of it on the altar 7 times, anointed the altar with all its utensils and the laver and its base to consecrate them. So all of these instruments that would be used by the temple priests. He poured some of the anointing oil then on Aaron's head and anointed him to consecrate him. And then Moses brought Aaron's sons and put tunics on them, girded them with sashes, and put hats on them as the Eternal had commanded Moses. So here we have Moses instructed directly by God to anoint Aaron as the high priest, and then his sons as lesser priests to serve in the tabernacle/temple duties in all of its functions. Although Aaron would be the only one that would do certain things, his sons would attend other duties in the tabernacle. This same chapter in verse 30 says that Moses took some of the anointing oil and some of the blood which was on the altar and sprinkled it on Aaron, on his garments, and on his sons, and on the garments of his sons with him. And he consecrated Aaron, his garments, his sons, and the garments of his sons with him. And here we have the example of God choosing someone to become a priest and to serve him in this position of authority, which is a position, an important position in God's government. It represents the position of Christ as our high priest and lesser priests that are under Christ's authority. Now, the high priest was to act as a mediator between God and the people. Aaron and his sons would present offerings. His sons would perform other temple duties on behalf of all the people. And the priesthood that God had established through these men, they were instructed to have very high standards of living, even higher than the people among the 12 tribes. And the reason is because the higher standards was set as an example. They were given positions of authority. More was to whom much is given, much is expected. And so God expected more of these men. And the same principle applied to, and still applies to, the civil side. The civil side of authority, which was held by Moses, but not Moses alone. Let's look at that for a moment. If you go back in the book of Exodus to chapter 24, Exodus 24, I believe the AC may have kicked off. Do you want to check it again? Getting a little bit warm up here. I don't know about down there. Both sides of God's government, both civil and religious, were established to be servants of God and examples of how the people were all to live. There was the pastoral side, the religious side of God's government, but Aaron, of course, would not act alone. He had his sons that were ordained, but also the tribe of Levi. They served as priests as well in other functions. And so we're familiar with the saying, all Levites are priests, but not all priests are Levites. And it's referring to the temple priests. Not all temple priests were of other people in the tribe of Levi, but they were only to be of the sons of Aaron. Aaron's descendants would continue as priests, serving God in this way, and in this way they would minister pastorally, spiritually. But the civil side of leadership in God's government was reflected in the position that Moses had. Consider Exodus 24 in verse 1, where God, here they are at Mount Sinai, and God is establishing the nation and the form of government that they were to have. And he said to Moses, "Come up to the Eternal, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship from afar." So here he is calling Moses and 3 other individuals, but also 70 elders that were from the people of Israel, from all of the tribes. "And Moses alone shall come near the Eternal, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people go up with him." So Moses came, told the people all the words of the Eternal, and all the judgments, and all the people answered with one voice and said, "All the words which the Eternal has said we will do." Basically, it's likened to a bride saying, "I will, I do." And Moses wrote all the words of the Eternal, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Eternal. And Moses took half of the blood, put it in basins, and half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant and read in the hearing of the people. And they said, "All that the Eternal has said we will do. We will be obedient." Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant which the Eternal has made with you according to all these words." So Moses went up also with him Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. And they saw the God of Israel. It's referring to Christ, who is the God of Israel. As he said, "I am." And there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and it was like the very heavens in its clarity. But on the nobles of the children of Israel he did not lay his hand, so they saw God, and they ate and drank. So they all went up, and they all were being ordained in this way, in positions of authority, but they didn't all go up as Moses did, because he had the highest position of authority among the people. In verse 12, then the Eternal said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and be there, and I will give you tablets of stone and the law and the commandments which I have written, that you may teach them." So here are the laws of God's government to be administered on the earth. Moses arose with his assistant, Joshua, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. And he said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we come back to you. Indeed, Aaron and Hur are with you, and if any man has difficulty, let him go to them." And Moses went up the mountain, and a cloud covered the mountain, and the glory of the Eternal rested on the mountain, and the cloud covered it 6 days, and the seventh day he called Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And so it's believed that the 70 elders actually did go up the mountain, but not all the way up the mountain. And there is an area on the place where I believe the true Mount Sinai is, where these men would have gathered while Moses went all the way up to the top or pinnacle of the mountain. And so God here is establishing leaders of his government among the people. In Numbers chapter 11, if you go forward to the book of Numbers in the 11th chapter, we have another account of this. And I'm only going to read a couple of verses in this chapter. In verse 16, "So the Eternal said to Moses, 'Gather to me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people, and officers over them. Bring them to the tabernacle of meeting, that they may stand there with you. And I will come down and talk with you there, and I will take of the Spirit that is upon you, and will put the same upon them. And they shall bear the burden of the people with you, that you may not bear it yourself alone.'" So God instructed Moses to choose 70 elders who you know are good men, who you know are respected individuals among all of the tribes. And God said, "I will put the Spirit that I've given you, the Spirit of understanding, to these individuals as well. And they will help you in administering his government on the earth among the people." So Moses, in this way, was to be the civil or administrative part of God's government. In fact, in Moses' final blessing before his death, and you don't need to turn there, but I'm going to read the two scriptures in Deuteronomy 33, verses 4 and 5. Moses was giving a final blessing here before he died, and he told a story about the people of Israel. And he said that Moses commanded a law for us, speaking in the third person, a heritage of the congregation of Jacob. And he was king in Jeshurun. He refers to himself as being a type of king among the people of Israel. Jeshurun is a term referring to the people of Israel. He was king in Jeshurun when the leaders of the people were gathered, all the tribes of Israel gathered together. And so we see that God established this religious or pastoral side with the priests, as well as the civil or administrative side with a form of king and elders. The two sides, however, both would work together. They would both work together to serve God first and foremost. And in this way, when you serve God first and foremost, you're going to serve the people, what is best morally for the people, although many of the people might disagree and say that's not best for us. And it's mostly because they want something else. But God, he always has the best interest of people in mind. The problem is that people tend to think that they know what's in their best interest, aside from what God instructs, which usually means that they want the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and seek to feed pride or ego. But God's government, God has established laws that teach people that we are to exercise self-control. Temperance is a fruit of the Spirit of God. And when we exercise self-control and obey God, those people that serve will serve with a self-sacrificing type of service. It is a servant-based leadership that we find in God's government, which is why Christ said, he who is the greatest among you is going to be those who serve, who are serving others and helping others. Oh, they might have more authority. You might have to, listen to them, but they're still servants. And they, we need to trust that they are doing what is best in our best interest according to God's standards when they are following God rightly. And so we see in God's government that it is a hierarchical government. It is a top down form of government. We can't deny that. Let's go to Matthew 7. The founding fathers of America once understood that this was God's government, and many people sacrificed everything for the greater good. They practiced a self-sacrificing form, a servant-based type of leadership. Many of the forefathers gave everything. They gave up friends, they gave up family, they gave up careers, property. Many of them even gave up their own lives because they understood that this was the will of God for America to become a great nation. They wanted to serve God first and foremost to the best of their understanding, and they did a very good job of it to the best of their understanding. It was a consistent part of lawmaking in our history. For centuries, this was the case. Tragically, within the last several decades, the majority of elected officials have moved away from serving God, and in this way, away from serving what is best for the people. They've adopted unconstitutional policies and have twisted the words of the Constitution to try to say they mean something that they truly do not. And we see a striking example in this whole idea of a separation between church and state. It's not found in the Constitution, but they say it is. People act like it's there, and how they have applied it is actually separating God from government, which was never, ever to be the case. We see that they began by forbidding prayer in school. Then they took Bibles out of most classrooms, at least the ones that are run by the government, and they forbid people to say that abhorrent behaviors such as homosexuality or bisexuality, lesbianism, or any other sexual deviancy. They forbid people to say that that is immoral and evil. So basically, to speak the truth, our nation has been on a steady decline for at least the last 30 years, and it's going to continue. It will continue to decline when we do not have God as a focus of government. The government of God focuses on serving God, and without God, no government designed by men is going to endure. And Christ made this point while teaching how people should live morally, how they should live according to God's ethic, His standards, His laws, commandments, and statutes. And Christ said this in Matthew 7 and verse 24, that whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended on, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall. Why? Because it was founded on the rock, something that is firm, something that will not fail. When everything else fails, God will not. But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them, they will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. So the governments that have been designed by men, they may last for decades. Some of them, by chance, may last for centuries, or if God desires it to be so. But regardless of their duration, they are destined for relative brevity if they do not have God being central to the statutes, the laws, and the judgments that are made within. Let's go to the book of Nehemiah, chapter 9. Because of this, God did not leave His laws, the laws of His government, up to debate. He spelled them out for us. He gave us commandments, statutes, judgments, laws They are a system of moral principles that are found in the first 5 books of the Bible that are called the Torah. Some call it the Pentateuch. Basically means the same thing. And so the ethic of God's government has existed from the very beginning. The very beginning of time, as shown to us in the Scriptures, his law has stood. And so we see that an angel referred to as Lucifer, once a righteous angel, he sinned. How could he sin if there were no laws? There were laws. He broke those laws, and he sinned, and he became the devil. We see that when mankind was created, Adam and Eve sinned. They violated God's command. They put something before God, breaking the first commandment. We see that their son Cain murdered his brother. How could it be murder if the 6th commandment did not already exist? We see that people on the earth became so wicked that God, I don't want to say thought twice, but God repented of I guess the Scriptures use the term repent, that he made man because they had become so evil. And so he brought a flood and wiped everybody out except for Noah and his family. Well, how could they become so evil if there were not laws, moral laws that they were to live by? We see in Genesis 26 and verse 5 that Abraham was an individual that God called to work with. And it says that he kept God's commandments, statutes, laws, the Torah, the Pentateuch, referring to all of the laws in there, including the holy days, that he observed these. Nehemiah 9, in chapter 9 and verse 13, we have a bit of reflection here. Where it says, "You came down also on Mount Sinai and spoke with them from heaven and gave them just ordinances and true laws, good statutes and commandments. You made known to them your holy Sabbath and commanded them precepts, statutes, and laws by the hand of Moses your servant," the one that was set up to be the head of the administrative side of God's government. So what's being referred to here is the Pentateuch, or the Torah, the laws of God's kingdom. Even though we find if we read through them all, we read all of God's statutes, laws, commandments, his judgments, that some of them were tailored specifically for human beings. Even though these moral laws existed before humans existed, God had to adjust them for physical human beings. And so we see that there are rules about diet, certain things you should not eat. There are rules about washing, rules about disease or illness. There are rules about sexual activity, which ones are forbidden. And those are things that the angelic community does not have to worry about. But there are laws to be administered by both sides, the religious and the civil leaders. And in the church, we might now say the pastoral and the administrative branches. Both sides are to have the same function of serving God first and foremost. And within each side, there are leaders that are above others, and some below them who serve God as well, but they might have different responsibilities within the church. And in this way, we see that hierarchy is a form of God's government. There must be people ordained for the purpose of serving in a position of authority. However, those in charge, they need to serve God first, and in this way, they serve the greater good. They're not serving their own desires or what they might want, unless what they want is to serve God first. This is a self-sacrificing type of leadership, and it's for the benefit of everybody involved so that the organization will endure. It will benefit everyone involved, and it will endure. Let's go over to the New Testament now, to Ephesians, the book of Ephesians, chapter 4. Surprisingly, there are some in the Church of God, even some who have been ordained as ministers, who do not approve of hierarchy. One such man wrote a book titled, "Lord, What Should I Do?" And in this book, it says, many of those who are moving on to home churches say that they are tired of church hierarchies that are too controlling. Now, it's an opinion-based statement, and there's no citing of any facts, but it's just something saying, oh yeah, many people say this. But it's vague, isn't it? Because someone may consider something to be too controlling. This really depends on if it's a matter of law or not. You know, if the standards of conduct are not according to decency, if they're not according to law, then it might be a matter of control. I mean, why are you trying to control everything? However, if the standards are grounded in law, if they are grounded in decency, then it's not a matter of control. It's a matter of obedience to God. And so the person who thinks, oh, you're trying to be too controlling, well, maybe they're just not really trying to obey God the way that they should. But what this disgruntled individual attempted to do was to get people to be comfortable with staying at home and listening to him instead of seeking fellowship with others when they're able. This man went on to say that Jesus said in Revelation 2:15, you also have those who hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. And then the man claimed that the Nicolaitans were known for imposing hierarchical, dictatorial type of government structures over their congregations. Now this is kind of subtle. It gets a little play on words, but it's still, when you examine what the sentence, it's easy to see what he implies. I mean, why put the two terms hierarchy and dictatorship together unless you're trying to besmirch hierarchy? He then asks this question, what is the leadership structure like in your church? Is it rigidly top-down where no one dares question the leadership? Well, again, there's some subtlety here of using the terms rigid and no one dares question the leadership, and then referring to hierarchy, which is top-down. Now, it's true that men have misused hierarchy. It has been misused, but that does not make hierarchy evil. It's the people that are involved that are not doing what they should. They're not serving God first and foremost. Now, God's government is one that's top down. And if this man were confronted about this issue, he would likely agree that God's government is top down. He's the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. But what this individual does not like, it appears, is anyone being over him, which is why he formed his own organization telling people to have church at home. He also said that Christ's church isn't made of bricks and mortar. It isn't identified by corporate organizations or hierarchies of men. Now again, that statement is only partially true. Christ's church is not made of bricks and mortar. That's true. It's made of individuals, those who have the Spirit of God. However, even if you're meeting in a home, it has walls, is a roof, and also Christ said that his church was built on hierarchy. Hierarchy that included men. Christ was born as a man. Christ called and ordained 12 apostles. These individuals ordained elders and deacons to serve under them. And so hierarchy is God's form of government. And an attempt to not make it so is not serving God. It's serving personal interest. This minister also wrote in the same publication, the church Jesus founded originally met in homes where small numbers of believers gathered in his name. And then he puts in parentheses Matthew 18:20. Do not let anyone mislead you into believing that you must attend an organized church. Again, it's only partially true. He's using half-truths here. Yes, many people met in homes. That's true. But people also met in synagogues, established places of worship. Those synagogues are made of what? Brick and mortar, stones. And also, people gathering for a church service is not what Christ referred to when this man referred to Matthew 18:20, and we heard that in a sermon or two, and we have a booklet on the subject. He was talking about decisions made within church leadership, a hierarchical form of leadership. In addition, God's church is to be organized. It's not a free-for-all where everybody does what they want, what everyone doing what's right in their own eyes. It has structure. There are laws. People are put into positions of authority. And Paul wrote about this structure in Ephesians chapter 4, saying that this was something that was designed by Christ, who is the God of Israel. In Ephesians 4 and verse 10, he who descended, referring to Christ, is also the one who ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fulfill all things. And he himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors, and some teachers, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. So this is a form of God's government on the earth. Christ establishing it within the church on the earth. Some people actually say, oh no, these words were not in the original text. They were added later by people who wanted to set up hierarchy in the church. But that's not true. They were not added. This government that the church is to have, this form, was reflected in the temple where priests performed temple duties. And we see that there were other Levites that were given other duties to serve, not just in the temple or around the temple, but also within different cities throughout the nation of Israel. Levites were to be given a portion of land within every city where all the tribes were, so that there would be a priest in every city there to serve the people, to teach the people. There were also Kohathites, and these were individuals that were to fulfill more manual labor, the moving of furniture in the tabernacle. And it's the same kind of system that we still have today, where there are pastors, and then there are elders, and they teach, and they serve in this way. And then there are deacons who are called to serve in other functions, and there are maybe other brethren involved that are there to serve some of the more, what we might say, more menial tasks, but it doesn't mean that they're not necessary. They are very necessary, and they are all important. It's a hierarchical form of government, but in this form, all are servants. Now, Mr. Bradick had mentioned in a sermon given quite some time ago, 2011, I believe, is when the sermon was given, and it's a sermon about church government. I highly recommend listening to it. It goes into perhaps more detail, or at least detail in other ways that I am not going into today. It is available on our website to listen to in the audio section of our library, in the featured audio section. I think it might be a good idea for us to pull the video out of the archives and maybe post the video of it, because it is a very helpful message that is enduring, like God's government. Those principles will forever stand. But Mr. Bradick had mentioned in that message that he knew somebody who said, it was a minister in the church that said, I want nobody over me and nobody under me. I didn't hear that say personally, but you heard it said, Art. And but you see how silly that is. That doesn't really work, does it? It's called socialism. And that doesn't serve the greater good of the people. That doesn't serve God at all. There must be people in charge. There needs to be people who are under them so that everything gets done. I mean, if it's just a bunch of people, everybody would want to be in charge. You pick your office. Everybody's going to want to be the one in charge. Nothing's going to get done. It's going to be a mess. There needs to be men who are prayerfully called and ordained to serve God in positions of authority, and people who are able to teach and who are called to teach. And these need to delegate other duties to people that can fulfill those. Deacons, brethren. And that's so that they can focus on doing something that is very important, vital, which is feeding the flock. They need to be available for counsel. They need to have time to work on sermons. In our age, we need to be able to work on booklets or publish booklets or do telecasts. All of these things need to be done. It's the job of the ministry to be able to take a step back and look at the big picture. What is not being done, or what needs to be, we need to focus on a little better. We need to do that a little better. And so there needs to be people responsible for that. But there also needs to be people responsible for setting up tables, for setting up the chairs, for running the sound system, for bringing food and drink for us to enjoy. There needs to be people to work on getting the mailings out. That's something that, in the ancient times, they didn't have to worry about that, although people did go out on mail routes delivering letters. But these are all important functions within the body of God's government. But they do not all necessitate the same level of authority. 1 Corinthians 12 just because some might have a lower office or position in the church, meaning less responsibility, it does not mean that they are less of a person. It doesn't mean that, the quality of the job done can be less. It simply means that there are many tasks to do, and they do not all require people in higher positions of authority to be directly involved in all of those tasks in order to make sure that they get done. In 1 Corinthians 12 in verse 27, referring to the church, which is also called the body of Christ, it says, now you are the body of Christ and members individually. We're all important. And God has appointed these in the church. And here comes a list. First, apostles. Second, prophets. Third, teachers. After that, miracles. Then gifts of healing, helps, administrations, varieties of tongues. And he goes on to say, are all apostles? Is everybody called to be an apostle? No. Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Are all workers of miracles? No. Does everybody have the same gifts of healing? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? No. God puts people in positions in the church where he sees fit, where they should be. And they best serve in that manner. And then he went on to say in verse 31, but earnestly desire the best gifts, and yet I show you a more excellent way. What is that way? What is the more excellent way? Well, you can summarize and say, well, it's God's way, of course. It's the way of love, of loving God first and loving others second as you would love yourselves. That's the basis of the whole law. All the commandments, all the Torah is based upon those two precepts. And in this way, we all can benefit from God's government. We all learn how we can best serve God and best serve others. It's the form, but it's also the function of God's kingdom or his government. And not everybody is called to be in higher positions of authority, otherwise nothing would get done. James even went on to say, and I've made this point to some, that really should take it to heart. He said in James 3 and verse 1, my brethren, let not many of you become teachers. In other words, everybody should not desire to be the one in charge, teaching people, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. And so this is something not to be taken lightly. We need to be very careful about this. Ministers need to be very careful with what they say from the pulpit. And I'm not saying we don't make mistakes. I've had my share of mistakes. I've said things that were inaccurate from the pulpit. And when we discover that they are inaccurate, we correct them. There are some people that might be able to teach. They might think that they are. Hey, I'm a teacher of God. I should be a teacher of God. And then they'll take it upon themselves to become a teacher, maybe start another group. But this has never been God's way. I've heard people say in the past, God told me that I need to do this. And I question, did he tell you? Did you hear him speak to you? Well, no, but he made it known to me that this is what I need to do. Really? Because it doesn't seem like that's what you should be doing to me. I know it starts to become a matter of opinion, and people are going to do what they're going to do, but I think it's presumptuous. It's dangerous. I would not do it. God has a way of doing things, and that's how he does it. And when he calls people to be put in positions of authority, we accept that. We don't become disgruntled and go, it should have been me. I should be in the charge. I should be teaching. I know better than that minister. I should be teaching. I'm going to start my own group. No, we can't do that. Let's go outside the body of the church. To become a body of the church, or part of the body, that seems backwards to me. In any case, let's go to Isaiah 9. It's clear that God is a king. God is a king that sits at the top of his government. And the tabernacle, we see, was designed to reflect God's throne room. John was given a vision of God's throne in heaven. Christ is referred to as sitting at the right hand of the Father. So there is the king, and then there's the King of Kings, meaning a king over lesser kings, the Lord of Lords, meaning a master over lesser masters. Again, it's hierarchy. It's top down. But God's government is not designed to best serve the elite. No, those called for positions of authority are to serve others. Isaiah chapter 9 gives us a prophecy of God's government coming to the earth when God comes to the earth. When I mean a form of his government is to exist right now on the earth, but we don't have God on the earth with us at this time. But we have this prophecy in Isaiah 9 in verse 6 that says, "Unto us a child is born," speaking of Christ. "Unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder. And his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it in establishment with judgment and justice from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Eternal of hosts will perform this." That is really wonderful. That is so inspiring. It's such a wonderful thing to look forward to, the time when Christ will literally be here. His government will not only be established on the earth, but it will spread around the globe eventually. And who else will be here? His saints. The chosen saints are going to come with him, and they are going to reign at his side, although under his authority. And then we see that he said that the apostles will each have positions of authority, each over a tribe. And over all of the 12 tribes will be David, will be raised up to serve in that position in the level of authority. It's prophesied that Christ will rule with a rod of iron, meaning that God's laws are going to be strictly enforced. They're not malleable. We can't adjust them according to what we might want. Situational ethics is not something that will exist, and we shouldn't practice something like that right now. Let's go to Deuteronomy 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6. God's government is one that the world truly is familiar with. He has not kept people in the dark about this. And we have a first-hand example, even people who do not believe in God, some calling themselves atheists. They have a form of God's government shown to them in marriage. In marriage. When a man marries a woman, he becomes the head of that family, the leader of that family, and he is to be Christ-like morally. And this means self-sacrificing service for the good of the family. The Apostle Paul mentioned this several times, but one scripture is 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 3, where he said, I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man. And the head of Christ is God. In other words, we all have a boss. We all have somebody to answer to. It's hierarchy. And when you think about it, the first sin of mankind, the sin of Eve and then Adam, came because they did not follow God's government. No. Eve didn't listen to her husband. She listened to the serpent. Oh, I'll do what the serpent tells me to do. Adam, he didn't listen to God. He followed his wife. Well, she said I should do this. That's what I'll do, even though God said I shouldn't. They thought they could get something else, something God was holding back from them, that they could get more than God was offering, as if he wasn't offering enough. And so they violated his command. And this has been the history of mankind ever since that sin. In this way, administrations, governments designed by men have come and gone. And the form of democracy that you and I have in America seems to be the best that people can do. But notice the words of Alexander Fraser Tytler. He was a professor, a writer, a historian, and he also became Judge Advocate of Scotland, and this is in the late 1700s. Wise individual, and he's attributed to having said this. You may have heard it before, but it's worth reviewing. He said, and of course, this is before America even was founded as a nation. Or perhaps, I'm sorry, that could be inaccurate. It might be around the same time, but it's somewhere around there. He said, a democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largest from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. The average age, he went on to say, of the world's greatest civilizations has been 200 years. These nations have progressed through this sequence, from spiritual bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to apathy, from apathy to dependence, from dependence back into bondage. This quote, the latter part of it here, is known as the Tytler cycle. Now, to be fair, just as an aside, some believe that this cycle is attributed to Alexis de Tocqueville, who was a public servant in the 1800s. But regardless of who said it, the points remain the same, and they should be well taken. The history of democracies show us that this is how it plays out when they do not keep God as a focal point of their administration, of how they function. Look at the chart, if you will. We had these handed out, and I'm sorry, I guess I should have figured out how to flash one up on the screen. I could have done that, but you can look it up. Just look up the Tytler cycle, Tytler cycle. So it begins in bondage here, and it doesn't mean that people necessarily have to be in chains, that they are slaves, but it just means that they are oppressed, that people are there are others in positions of authority that are taking advantage of them in ways that they should not, that are not right. And so people oppose those conditions, and they want to be liberated. And they search for unity through faith. And they find, oh, well, God's government says that we shouldn't be like this. This isn't how government should behave. They shouldn't treat people like this. And so they search. And they search not only within themselves, but they look for people to fight back. They gather strength. They are motivated. And this is reflected in the courage step here. And people fight for freedom. And eventually, their passion for this cause, their faith, if you will lead to liberty, freedom. And in this, when people are liberated in this way and they have a form of God's government, they can prosper. They can become, well off as a nation or as a people. But when they are well off, after a period of time, people begin to take it for granted, the things that they have. I mean, think about it. Generations today are living on the coattails of the past. And we live in a society where many people think that they deserve these things, that they should be given to me. I live in a great nation. Look at all these things people have. The Starbucks and the Nike shoes and all these things. I should just have these things. I shouldn't have to work for them. People think they deserve them without the effort. Not everybody, of course. I'm speaking generally. But this abundance turns for people to focus on material things. The things that can be enjoyed by the eye or by the flesh. And this motivates people to move towards selfishness. They start thinking it's about the stuff. It's what I want. I just want to enjoy things. I want to have things. I want the stuff. And they move further away from God. They become complacent with those things that they have found in the next step and feel they're entitled. People are self-absorbed, not thinking about God, not thinking about what's best for others, but about what's best for themselves. And in this, people begin to lose personal responsibility. It's about them. It's not about what we should be doing. It's not about being useful and helpful. I watched a documentary about Arnold Schwarzenegger recently, and I can't say he's necessarily a morally good person. I think he's done a lot of decent things in his life and his career, but in any case, something that was taught to him as a child by his father was, are you being useful? Is your life useful? Are you being helpful today? Because the world's going to keep moving. The world's going to keep going on, and it doesn't really matter what you're experiencing. It's going to keep going with or without you. So are you going to be useful today? Are you going to be helpful? I think that's something that all of us need to consider. But this complacency moves to apathy and independence of the people, freedom that is controlled by who? Those people in charge, those people in government. And people become dependent on those people in charge because they're apathetic. And so they expect the government to give me those things. And right now we have a government that's moving people to think that way, that, hey, you just we'll give you what you all need. Just rely on us. Just let us take care of it, and we'll give you the things you need. Or maybe the things you want. They say what you want, and it's really, of course, a matter of opinion. But when it gets to that point, when people are dependent on the government to take care of them, they lose control. They don't have control even over their own lives. And that they're at a point of no return. They're going to move quickly right back into the place they started from, bondage. They will be oppressed. The form and function of God's government is not like this. Nothing like this. It has two sides. It is the spiritual or pastoral side, and it also is also the civil or administrative side. But both sides must agree with the fact that God is our judge, God is our lawgiver, and God is our king. And it is upon him that we need to rely. And in this belief, we focus on God, on how do we best serve God, and we live according to his laws, statutes, and judgments. When governments of men, or that is, I should say, governments designed by men, because all governments have men involved, but when they are forms of government that are designed by men and not by God, they are going to fail. God's government will not. And you and I are called to practice this form of government right now. But not just the form. Did I tell you to go back to Deuteronomy 6? Maybe I did, and I didn't turn there. But if you did not, let's go to Deuteronomy 6. We're going to end on that scripture. We are called to practice God's government right now, but not just the form, the function of serving God first and foremost in our lives, and in this way we serve others in a way that is best for them morally. It is what is written in the Torah, and it was adopted into a prayer called the Shema in Deuteronomy 6 in verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the eternal our God, the eternal is one. You shall love the eternal your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. And it goes on to list the laws, the statutes, the judgments of God. That is how you and I are to function. The form is hierarchy. The function is self-sacrificing service to God and to others. It's about being useful, about being helpful to God. You know, when God calls us to serve him, we're going to experience all kinds of things in life. But it's not about us, is it? It's about how we can be best used by God, how we can best serve him. And so he's going to allow us to go through many things. Much of them will be trials, so that we can understand, how do I best serve God in this? It's about learning how to be his faithful servant. So I ask us to practice God's form of government now. A government that will endure. Because when all else fails, when the governments designed by men fail, and they will fail, God's government will not. And Christ said that his church will endure.